Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're to be talking about my must-draft wide receiver list for fantasy football in 2021. Inside of today's video, I'm going to be talking about 3 wide receivers that, based upon where they are going right now at their current average draft position, I feel like they are must-draft wide receivers for fantasy football in 2021. But before we get into this deep dive of these 3 wide receivers, I'd like to ask if you are new to my YouTube channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship, and whether you are new or not to my YouTube channel, please make sure to hit the like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video, as well as if you guys do enjoy reading content, the written content side of fantasy football, please make sure to check out the link in the description as well as in the pinned comment to go ahead and read my articles on Awesemo.com. I post articles every single day, so if you guys do enjoy reading fantasy football stuff, make sure that you guys check that out. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first wide receiver we're to be talking about today is wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons, Calvin Ridley, current ADP wide receiver number 5 off the board on Underdog, overall pick 15.5, up 2.98 slots on the week. Now, when it comes to ranking wide receivers in fantasy football, it seems like basically everyone has a mix and match of Davante Adams, Stephon Diggs, and Tyreek Hill inside of their top 3 at the wide receiver position, really in any order. Some people have Tyreek, wide receiver 1, others have Stephon Diggs, and now with the Davante Adams news that Aaron Rodgers is going to be the quarterback, some people have Davante Adams as their number 1 overall wide receiver. But then after that, it is a amalgamation of a bunch of other wide receivers as people's wide receiver 4. My current wide receiver number 4 is Calvin Ridley, and in my opinion, he would be my odds-on favorite to finish as the number 1 wide receiver, besides those other guys who obviously people have ranked 1 through 3rd. And the reason why I feel like Calvin Ridley has a pretty solid chance as finishing as the wide receiver number 1 in fantasy football this season is because of the amount of volume that Calvin Ridley is going to be seeing in an offense that produces an immense amount of volume to the pass catching attack. Basically, every single year, Matt Ryan is one of the top 5 quarterbacks in passing attempts. That is because the defense of the Atlanta Falcons is just not very good at all. They haven't been good since they made the Super Bowl all that many years ago and choked it away to the New England Patriots. They just have not had a strong defense, and Matt Ryan is having to put the team on his back by airing the ball all throughout the game, and especially later on in the game when they are down, he's gonna have to try to crawl his way back into the game, and the best way to do that is obviously with a very heavy passing attack. Now, Calvin Ridley is the now wide receiver 1 of the Atlanta Falcons. Before this season, he would have been looked at as the wide receiver 2 on the team because Julio Jones was ahead of him. Now, some may argue that with the addition of Kyle Pitts into this offense, that really dials back the amount of upside Calvin Ridley has, but I would argue that Calvin Ridley was a really good wide receiver in real life and in fantasy football with Julio Jones on the field and without Julio Jones on the field. So even if Kyle Pitts is this out-of-worldly, generational talent at the tight end position that everyone is talking about him being, it shouldn't really matter at all for Calvin Ridley. If the team is continuing to throw the ball at this very high rate, I see no reason why Calvin Ridley won't be able to have a repeat season of 2020 in 15 games, finishing as the wide receiver number 5 in PPR, 4.5 PPR, and the wide receiver number 4 in standard. He averaged last season 18.8 PPR points per game, 15.8 half PPR points per game, and 12.8 standard points per game, meaning from a points per game perspective, he was the wide receiver 4 in PPR, 4.5 PPR, and the wide receiver number 3 in standard. This is because of the high target numbers that he was seeing. 143 targets last year, ranking 7th at the wide receiver position, which is 9.5 targets per game. He had 90 receptions, 6.0 per game, ranking 11th at the wide receiver position for 1,374 receiving yards, 91.6 per game, ranking 4th wide receiver for a grand total of 9 total touchdowns, 9th at the wide receiver position. He also had a 2,063 air yards thrown his way on the season, 137.5 air yards per game, ranking number 1 at the wide receiver position. He also was top 15 in target share of an offense. 25.1% of the targets were going his way in Atlanta, ranking 13th at the wide receiver, 26.8% of the red zone target share. So it's very clear that Calvin Ridley is able to put up these big numbers with Julio Jones in the lineup for some of those games. Now you take Julio Jones completely out of the equation, and now it's Calvin Ridley, it's Kyle Pitts, it's Russell Gage, it's Mike Davis, and it's a couple of other players on this team. I'm sure Hayden Hurst will be involved. There's other wide receivers involved as well, but those are just the main names in this offense. I can assure you that this team is going to be throwing at a very high clip in 2021, and if Calvin Ridley is able to suck in that immense amount of target share that we saw in 2020 with Calvin Ridley, then Calvin Ridley is on a rocket ship directly to the moon for fantasy football stardom in 2021, and my belief is that is exactly what is going to be happening. Matt Ryan is going to be throwing the ball so many fucking times, and Calvin Ridley is the best wide receiver on this team, and when you're drafting in fantasy football, in my opinion, a lot of what I look for is volume at the wide receiver position. Obviously, you want good volume. You want the ball actually being thrown near the wide receiver. You want the quarterback to be a relatively talented quarterback, so if you're getting a bunch of targets, then you can actually bring the ball in, and you obviously want the wide receiver to be able to catch the ball, and Calvin Ridley has all of those things. He's got the great quarterback in Matt Ryan. I understand not everyone really likes to congratulate Matt Ryan or talk about him as one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. Sure, he's not a top 5 quarterback, but he's still, in my opinion, a top 12 quarterback in the NFL. He's at least a top 16 quarterback in the NFL, which would put him in the higher half of the NFL. From quarterback play, Calvin Ridley is one of the best wide receivers. So when you have a good quarterback with a really good wide receiver, with a shit tier defense, all of those things, you put them together in a blender and it spits out a smoothie that is a great wide receiver. I really believe in Calvin Ridley in 2021. The eyes check is there for me. When I look at this guy with my eyes, I can see that he is a very talented wide receiver in the NFL, and the stats check it out as well. He has the high target number, the high target share in this offense. He has the high amount of air yards, so the ball is zipping his way deep down the field. He is one of those wide receivers that genuinely has game-breaking potential. He's one of those guys that can have a 150-yard game for 3 total touchdowns, something crazy that Tyreek Hill could do. I believe Calvin Ridley can do as well. Obviously not as fast as a guy like Tyreek Hill. He runs a 4.43 40-yard dash, so he is relatively fast, and I am enamored to be getting Calvin Ridley inside of the second round when I genuinely believe he could be the #1 wide receiver in fantasy football for 2021. Whether Julio Jones was there or not, I was super high on Calvin Ridley, but now with Julio Jones gone, I am even more excited for the upside of Calvin Ridley in 2021. Next up, we have wide receiver of the Los Angeles Rams, underdog ADP, wide receiver 15, overall pick 35.5, Roberto Woods. Robert Woods, Bobby Trees, the man of many names, but he earned all those nicknames because Robert Woods is one of the most underrated wide receivers, in my opinion, in the National Football League. Robert Woods, year in and year out for fantasy football, has been one of the most consistent top 20 wide receivers in the last 5 seasons of his NFL career. Last year in 16 games, Robert Woods finished as the wide receiver 12 in PPR, 13 in half PPR, and the wide receiver number 13 in standard, averaging 15.3 PPR points per game, 12.5 half PPR points per game, and 9.7 standard points per game, meaning from a points per game perspective, he was the wide receiver 19 in PPR as well as in half PPR, and same thing goes within standard. Now, I know what you might be thinking, Nick, I like Robert Woods, but I think Cooper Kupp is going to be very involved in this offense. Is that going to be hurting Robert Woods? And I would say no to that question. I would say that Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods can both flourish inside of this offense, especially with the uptick in the amount of passing I think they're going to be doing in 2021, as well as with the better quarterback in Matthew Stafford. In the offseason, I guess I should say, I don't even remember when it happened, but it was very quickly after the Super Bowl ended that Jared Goff just got shipped right out of town. Sean McVay wanted his ass gone because Jared Goff was just simply not able to really play to the caliber he played early on in his career because the defenses figured out that Sean McVay was just calling in to the huddle, telling him exactly what to do, and then before there's a certain amount of time in the quarterback's headset that they could actually hear, the coach and the defenses figured out that they would just move all around, do all types of crazy shit to make sure that Sean McVay can't tell Jared Goff exactly what to do, where to throw the ball. And once that ended up happening, once defenses figured out that Jared Goff could not think for himself, things went downhill for Jared Goff. Now, I'm not over here having the roast of Jared Goff because I actually think Jared Goff is a perfectly fine NFL quarterback. Obviously not worth all the money the Rams paid him, but he's not a shit tier quarterback. He'll be fine in Detroit. But Matthew Stafford is the upper echelon at the quarterback position. Matthew Stafford is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL who is genuinely very underappreciated for what he has done in Detroit. And speaking of Detroit, in Detroit in 2019. I would use 2020 as the example, but Kenny Golladay got hurt. We saw games where Kenny Golladay as well as Marvin Jones were having a feast on the defense. And I think that could be very similar this year with Robert Woods and with Cooper Kupp in LA. But in my opinion, Robert Woods is the Kenny Golladay, Cooper Kupp is the Marvin Jones. Obviously, Cooper Kupp has a lot more, people have a lot more respect for Cooper Kupp than they seem to have had for Marvin Jones, because Marvin Jones was always like a 10th round fantasy pick. Cooper Kupp's going a couple of rounds or pretty close to Robert Woods, but I genuinely believe Robert Woods is the 1A in this offense in Los Angeles, and with Matthew Stafford under center, I really believe that Robert Woods has top 12 potential in 2021. Coming off the board at wide receiver 15, that is some pretty solid value. Last year, with Jared Goff in 16 games, Robert Woods had 130 targets, 8.1 per game, ranking 12th at the wide receiver position, 90 receptions, 11th at the wide receiver position, 5.6 per game. He had 935 receiving yards, 22nd at the wide receiver position, 58.4 per game, and 8 total touchdowns on the season, ranking 13th at the wide receiver position. But I think the biggest takeaway that we can garner from the 2020 NFL season for Robert Woods is his target quality rating and his catchable target rate. He had a 4.6 out of 10 target quality rating, 98th at the wide receiver position. That doesn't sound very good, right? For a guy that finishes as a top 12 wide receiver in PPR, 13 in half PPR, and 13 in standard, you would think that maybe he's getting better quality targets than that. 74.6% catchable target rate for Robert Woods, 69th at wide receiver. Normally when I say the number 69, I do my Borat voice. I say, very nice, I like, but number 69, you don't like that for Robert Woods. You want him to have a high catchable target rate. And I believe that both of those numbers, the target quality rating as well as the catchable target rate, are going to go to the moon in 2021. His true catch rate in 2020, when the ball is actually going to hit Robert Woods' hands, was 92.8%, ranking 12th at the wide receiver position. Clearly, Jared Goff was strangleholding or having a stranglehold over what Robert Woods' production was going to be in 2021. Now, it wasn't all with Jared Goff. They had John Walford play a game, I believe, last year, maybe multiple games before he got knocked out in that playoff matchup, and then Jared Goff came in. But I guess not all Jared Goff's fault, but Robert Woods was dealing with some not the greatest quarterback play last season and was still able to elevate himself to be a top 15 wide receiver in all formats. So now, just put your thinking cap on, rub the crystal ball, and imagine what the fuck's gonna happen when Robert Woods has one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL throwing him the ball. Magic is going to happen, in my opinion. It's like when you go to Disney, you know, magic happens there. As well as the fact that Cam Akers got hurt. Obviously, that sucks. I do not root for injuries. Cam Akers is one of my favorite running backs in the NFL. It is genuinely a shame that he tore his Achilles. But does Sean McVay really hand over the keys truly to Darrell Henderson? Or do they try to, maybe throw the ball a little bit more than they previously would have with Cam Akers as the workhorse back in Los Angeles? I think that is entirely possible that they try to throw the ball more. Now, is that a narrative that's going to be 100% true? No, but I think that gives a slight uptick to Robert Woods. I already liked Robert Woods before the Akers injury. Now, just tick him up a little bit more. I think that this offense is going to be high-flying, a very high-scoring offense in 2021. So why not draft the wide receiver 1 on the Matthew Stafford-led team? Pretty late, wide receiver 15 off the board, overall pick number 35.5, but he's quickly rising up the draft boards because more and more people are starting to realize that Robert Woods is in an excellent situation, and Robert Woods is a very good wide receiver. So before we get into the final wide receiver of this video, I'd like to ask you guys, if you do end up enjoying today's video, you've had a great time so far, to please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day, and make sure that if you have enjoyed, hit the like button, and let me know in the comment section who your 3 must-draft wide receivers are for fantasy football in 2021, I should say. Final wide receiver on the list. Wide receiver of the Pittsburgh Steelers, underdog ADP, wide receiver number 25, overall pick 49.7, Mr. Can't Catch the Ball, Diontae Johnson. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Nick, you just cracked a joke slightly about how Diontae Johnson can't catch the ball. And that is true. Last season, Diontae Johnson was dropping the ball left and right. He had one of the highest drop rates in the NFL, dropped one of the highest amount of number of balls last season. And I understand that. Wasn't the greatest, right? But you could see an opportunity for if Diontae Johnson was to work on his pass catching, which he has been doing all offseason long, that Diontae Johnson has potential to be one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football because of the amount of upside that he has due to the amount of targets that he's going to be seeing. It seemed like last year, Juju was not Big Ben's favorite target. It seemed like Chase Claypool was not Big Ben's favorite target. You want to know who it was? It was Diontae Johnson. Second-year wide receiver last season, going into his third year at the NFL. Last season, in his sophomore season, in 15 games, finished as the wide receiver 21 in PPR, 22.5 PPR, and the wide receiver number 26 in standard, averaging 14.8 PPR points per game, 11.9 half PPR points per game, and 8.9 standard points per game. Meaning, from points per game perspective, he was the wide receiver 21 in PPR, 22.5 PPR, tied with like 7,000 other wide receivers, and wide receiver number 31 in standard. Now, I know you also might be thinking that, hey, Nick, they drafted Najee Harris, so maybe they're going to try to establish the run a little more, right? Last season, their running game was about as effective as putting 2 condoms on. You're only supposed to use 1 because then it works more effectively. If you put on 2, it's basically like canceling out the other one. That's some sex ed from me, but what I actually am trying to tell you guys is that the running was not very effective last year. The offensive line was terrible. It was just opening wide open, and James Conner couldn't do anything. So they bring in Najee Harris, and the reason why they do that is because they expect that Najee Harris will be able to run better behind a worse offensive line, which I think will be true. But the offensive line loses one of their bigger players. The offensive line is not built back up. They're still going to have to be throwing the ball very much in these games. They're going to have to throw the ball a lot. And even with a stronger defense, you saw it last year, they were still throwing the ball at a super high rate because of how bad the offensive line is. And I believe that is exactly how it's going to be going again in 2021. I expect them to try to run the ball more, but really, how effective can it be for the whole game if the offensive line is just getting worn down by the defense? Last year, Diontae Johnson had 144 targets, 9.6 per game, ranking 6th at the wide receiver position. He had 88 receptions, ranking 13th at the wide receiver position, 5.9 per game, 924 receiving yards, 25th at wide receiver, and 7 total touchdowns. How in the fuck are you going to get 144 targets and only have 924 receiving yards? If you expect Diontae Johnson to be as involved in this offense as I do, as involved in this offense as he was last season, then why would he not have more yards in 2021? If he works on the drops, again, I will note that the drops were fucking terrible last year. Terrible. 11 drops last season, 0.7 per game, number 1 at wide receiver, 7.6% drop rate, 16th at wide receiver. So sure, he was dropping the ball a lot last season, but if he works on it in the offseason, if he gets better, then he is a complete and utter steal at wide receiver 25. And say he doesn't get better. Say he's still dropping the ball, but you're still getting him at a value at wide receiver 25 with the amount of targets he is going to get. And if he is able to, catch the ball more effectively, like I genuinely believe he will be able to, and we should be seeing reports out of training camp preseason, we'll be seeing it, that Diontae Johnson can actually grip the football this time, that he is at an extreme value at this point at wide receiver number 25. He is a very polarizing player, though. I know probably half the people in the comment section are going to tell me that I'm an idiot for liking Diontae Johnson, but I'm chasing the volume here in Pittsburgh. I was a humongous fan of Diontae Johnson going into last season, and I will continue my fandom into 2021 and believing that Diontae Johnson is one of the better wide receivers in fantasy football and does have top 15 potential going as wide receiver number 25 off the board. So thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope you did end up enjoying. If you did at any point, please make sure to, like I said, hit that subscribe button down below. Again, let me know who your must-draft wide receivers are down below in the comment section. I love you guys all. Make sure you have a great rest of your guys' day. Happy Thursday. It's almost the weekend, baby. I love you guys all. Stay safe and have a great rest of your guys' day. As always, good boy.